And welcome to our panel. Could be the most broadly defined panel of the day, which is the state of media, entertainment, and advertising. Maybe we should have added politics and Perez Hilton and we could have figured out the riddle of the universe. I don't know. In any event, I'm glad to be here. My name's Spencer Ante, and I'm an associate editor at Bloomberg Business Week, where I've been writing about technology, media, and communication the last 10 years. I'm also the author of a book called Creative Capital, which is a biography of General George Doriot, who was the individual who pioneered the venture capital industry and the high-tech startup economy in the U.S., which powers a lot of our industry today. So we have a top-notch group of the world's leading advertising and media executives with us today, including executives from TV, radio, and advertising and marketing. And here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then briefly for about a minute or two, and then we'll dive into the panel for about an hour. And then I'm going to leave about 10 or 15 minutes for audience Q&A. And to make things more interactive and perhaps walk the walk a little bit, I'm going to encourage people in the audience to send me questions to my BlackBerry on Twitter. My Twitter account is @SpencerAnte, SpencerAnte. And just one update before we get started. The CEO of IMAX, Richard Gelfand, was not able to make it today, so we're sorry about that, but we still have 4 really talented people here. So our first panelist is Anthony Young. He's the CEO of ophthomediaus US, which is a large media agency owned by Publicis. Anthony?
Thank you, Spencer. Yes, I'm CEO for Ophthomediaus. We are a full-service integrated media agency, so we are media buyers, and particularly what we're known for is strategic planning and communication strategy. We have several offices, 5 offices around the country, but I'm based in New York.
Thank you. Our second panelist is John Guzman, who's the Global Chief Insights Officer of the advertising giant Young and Rubicam.
Hi, yes, I'm John Guzman. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Young & Rubicam. We oversee Brand Asset Valuator, which is the world's largest proprietary database of brands. And we use that to kind of form a basis of lots of the work that we do on brand strategies. We have 40,000 brands in the study across 55 countries and in a variety of different languages and formats. And in the U.S., we monitor 17,000 consumers on a quarterly basis, and we'll kind of get in and talk about some of the findings as we kind of get into the panel. I'm also the author of a book called The Brand Bubble, The Looming Crisis in Brand Value.
Thank you. Our third panelist is Mark Rosenthal, who is CEO of Current Media, the TV and online media company co-founded by former Vice President and information superhighway creator Al Gore.
So Current Media on television reaches about 60 million homes in the United States on cable and satellite. Around the world, we have another channel in the UK called Current UK, which is carried on the B-Sky-B platform, and a third channel now in Italy, carried on Sky Italia, called Current Italy. We like to regard ourselves as the media company for participatory storytelling, exploring the world's most interesting, exciting, and entertaining stories.
Great. And our last panelist is Charlie Riley, who's president of National Advertiser Platforms for Clear Channel Radio.
Good afternoon. I've spent about the last 20 years in different roles around the radio industry, local and national spot radio. For the last 2 years, led Clear Channel's Premier Radio Networks division, and in December was coerced into a role called the President of National Ad Platforms, where we're going to be integrating, everything from our CATS Media Group in spot radio, Premier Networks, our digital platforms, and the 800-plus radio stations that we operate.
Thank you. So I thought it would be useful to start off the panel by focusing on, taking the pulse of the advertising industry, which is the lifeblood of the media, as you know. And, like every other industry, advertising has been profoundly affected by the global financial crisis. And so I'd like to ask each of you, or whoever wants to pipe in on this, maybe Anthony is the best person because he's looking at a lot of these trends. How has the financial crisis impacted the advertising industry, and is the ad business entering a recovery?
Well, I mean, the advertising industry has been as hard hit, if not harder, than many industries. If I look at the last 2 years, there's some $29 billion of advertising budgets that have fallen out of the system. So significant. It's impacted, obviously, the media industry. It's impacted the agencies, probably less so than the media companies, given that a lot of agencies tend to less be involved in, or less have commission-based compensation and more fee-based. But nonetheless, that sort of fallout has been hugely impactful on us. Is the market recovering? I mean, it's certainly on the mend, but I think far from a recovery. And the kind of conversations we seem to be having with our clients, as we start to do our kind of planning towards the upfronts and other things, there's definitely a feeling that 2010 for a number of categories are improving, but for a number of others it's still seen as the bottom out year. In fact, the Zenith Optomedia does some annual, or does some advertising spend forecast. The last forecast was in December, and we are due for a recut of that, but back then the forecast was that 2010 was still going to be down slightly on 2009. There might be some improvement on that forecast, but that's kind of where we're sort of picking the market at the moment.
Yeah.
Charlie, what do you think?
And as a recipient of Anthony's investment, to kind of speak to how it's manifesting it for a media owner, back in the late fall and in December in the spot radio marketplace through Katz Media, we saw a 16% recovery in year-on-year, spend through Katz. That carried through into January in the spot radio marketplace, where we saw a 26% recovery. Now, that's a little bit of the nadir effect that occurred, a year ago in those numbers and this bottoming out process. And then that's carrying through in sort of low teens in the spot radio marketplace into February and March. It's, pretty broadly manifest. 7 of our top 10, categories are showing those kind of increased investments. You look at sort of the recovery in automotive that's happening from sort of a crisis phase to, perhaps a less crisis phase. CPG, and then entertainment, in our, fragmented attention world, people are using the medium as a directory to find, people's attention.
I think you can also say that the economic crisis quickly separated groups out. My fellow panelists may disagree, into sort of the haves, and the have-nots, or the ones that are going to have it in the future and the ones that may not have it in the future. You look at cable television, you look at the internet, and on a relative basis, basically, pretty flat growth, 2009 to what we expect to see in 2010. You're no doubt going to see internet advertising increase. You're going to see cable television advertising increase. Broadcast will probably stay flat, and I think that the less fortunate ones will still be down on a year-to-year basis. And,
John, you deal with. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I was going to say you deal with a lot of these clients day to day. What are you seeing from the client?
Yeah, I think just to pick up on Mark's point about sort of the haves and the have-nots, there's also sort of a segmentation in terms of how people are approaching the recovery. There's sort of the people that are very efficiency-led, that are driving, optimizing their CPM spend, focusing on efficiencies, procurement, ROI. What are they going to do to kind of get the best investment out of their dollars? And then there's also a group of people that have kind of approached the recession with a little bit of a catalyst and looking sort of at, this is the time to experiment. We're trying to get our feet wet in social media. We're trying to understand how to use user-generated content. How do we get into some of these more interesting, not interesting rather, but more innovative and new forms of media? So it's very difficult sometimes from, I think, a media perspective to plan for both of those, but you are seeing marketers sort of looking at both of those different decisions.
This is also kind of a perfect storm. You have, putting aside the economic crisis, you sort of have the rise of it's probably the bane of your existence. The procurement officer mentality at virtually at every advertiser now that says, I don't care what you do as long as you buy my media 10% cheaper. So that may be translated to buying 10% less media, but, or show me how you're going to do it cheaper, better, faster. Now, it's the net losers there are not only media buying firms, but they're also, tend to be the media owners as well, who all of a sudden are going to have to do it for 10% cheaper, which they don't really like very much. So that's all part of it, the perfect storm nature of this.
Yeah,
the center of that storm was the U.S. I just want to follow up on one thing with that. The crisis was obviously global. It filtered out to the rest of the world. But I'm curious, John, since you're the Global Insights Officer, how do you see the impact of the crisis affecting other regions of the global advertising market? Because from what I've seen the numbers, certain regions like Asia Pacific are expected to actually see pretty decent growth.
Yeah, it's interesting. We focused a lot of research sort of in the pre-post crisis recovery, both in the United States and sort of the BRIC markets as well as sort of the major European markets, and we saw some very profound differences. In the U.S., there was this massive focus towards sort of thrift, more mindless, from mindless to mindful consumption, and some really interesting data that came out of our survey that suggested that consumers were going to be much more thoughtful as they approach their spending in categories, and that some of the behaviors that they had taken with them through the recession were actually starting to become imprinted and were sticking with them as behaviors. When we contrasted that to some of the data in for example, in China and Japan, it was almost the exact opposite. So I think that you got to be very careful as you look at some of these trends across the different markets for where they're resonating, how long they're going to take hold, and how you really look at your marketing strategies to adjust the cultural context.
Anthony, did you want to make a point?
Well, I wanted to build on one of the points that John made, which was about there's have and have-nots, and there are some brands that are sort of really trying to take charge, and other brands that are trying to, just trying to maintain things. And I thought this year's Super Bowl was which is always a good bellwether for how the ad market's going to play, and what happened there. So what you saw was a lot of, challenger brands come into the Super Bowl for the first time, and a lot of established brands kind of pull out as they start to focus on costs and efficiency more. So, for example, you saw Pepsi come out of the Super Bowl, which, they've always been a fixture in that event, and Dr. Pepper come in. You saw car brands like General Motors come out of the Super Bowl, and the likes of Kia and VW come in. So that's a pretty good indication of how marketers start wanting to play the year. I think the ones that feel they need to grab hold of the year, they need to sort of use this as an opportunity to steal market share, and as other of the more established brands start to pull back media budgets, I thought it was a really interesting development.
There also is, I think, a tendency in tough economic times for some of those advertisers. Use Pepsi as an example. Right, so they pull out of the Super Bowl, but they put their focus behind a campaign called Pepsi Refresh, which is really all about doing good in the community and aligning themselves with that. So they're taking that same money that was spent a different way and trying to get some sort of halo effect about how they spend their money. You see that with a lot of brands right now. Everybody wants to be a good company, and they should be.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, it feels like it's the mashup of creative and digital and the procurement department. As a media owner, sitting where I do, today, it has to be really, really measured. That's what digital has irrevocably changed for all of us. And the creative has to get the consumers. If you start at the top of the funnel with our broadcast properties, we've got to invite them more deeply into the process, right? And people are going to self-select. Consumers will self-select as part of that. So we find that we're co-creating with a lot of advertisers and with agency partners. How do we move people from the very top through an ecosystem where they self-select and then are enriched and have an interaction with a brand or an offering that goes beyond sort of a 30-second impression, right? With Six Flags, we built a little app that ran across the country along with a bunch of radio, inviting people to build their own coaster. There was couponing pricing attached to that. McDonald's, what kind of coffee am I? Again, a widget that people just sort of produce throughout. You drive it with a big invitation with 30 seconds of broad impressions, and then invite people in and as they self-select. So it is, and every step of the way, it had to be highly measured, had to be creative, had to be sort of on brand. And then on the back end, you better make sure you're delivering with this with good value. I'm not paying kind of crazy prices for this. But as a media owner, we feel more challenged by our partners and advertisers to deliver sort of this whole ecosystem, using their digital assets, our digital assets, the front of the funnel, different parts of it. So I think it's not just a cost issue, it's a build a better model around as well.
Absolutely, Charlie, and I think the defining aspect we've been looking at criteria for marketers moving forward is that you have to deliver value and values. We've seen that not only in our attitudinal data, but actually in actual usage data, where we saw almost 72% of people that were focused on, I will buy into a company that has values that I share as my own, and equally 66% of people said they would walk away from a company on a purchase decision, all price being relatively equal, based on whether or not those values weren't there. So I think that, as Mark was talking, both Charlie are talking, this movement from sort of being a good company and saying you're good, sort of the storefront CSR, is going to move to really making values implicit in your business model and in your culture.
All businesses live in Missouri now, sure.
Exactly.
That raises a really interesting larger point, which is, what's the psychology of the global consumer? And so, I'm reminded of, after September 11th, there was all this talk about it's the end of irony. And obviously that wasn't true. It took a little while, but it came back with a vengeance. I'm also reminded of, to today's times, the Great Depression. Doing research, I've learned that there was a lot of concern during the 30s about the riskless economy, and that consumers really just became very fearful. And they really remained fearful until the end of World War II, in America at least, when confidence came back into the economy and people felt like they could go out and buy stuff. And they had some money to buy stuff too. So what I'm wondering now is, what's the psychology of the consumer today, post-crisis, and are we more frugal, or are we on the verge of, going back to our piggish and profligate ways, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things you have to consider is that 80% of us were born after World War II. So for all intents and purposes, this was our Great Depression. And in our data, as we've been sort of tracking it, we're seeing people moving past sort of the stages of simple fear and frugality into really a more hopeful, optimistic place. And that's because they're actually refining their consumption. They're being much more strategic in their spending. And they're driving a sense of more optimism. The big trends we see are self-reliance, something we call liquid life, which is the whole idea of getting yourself out of fixed costs as much as you can, getting rid of your excess overhead. So we saw that manifest itself in some really interesting technologies, examples like people using Hulu instead of having a cable bill, or moving your way into micropayments like Zynga, just finding ways that you can sort of live in a more fluid, more flexible way.
Yeah, there's definitely a change that's gone on. I think last year was the year when the Gen Y population overtook the Gen X's. Right. And so what you're finding is where a lot of the marketing over the last 10, 15 years has been targeted at those Gen X's. That's shifted, and that Gen Y population has come with a whole kind of different set of values. They are the internet generation. They've been always less about making money. The Gen X's have been trying to catch up with their parents, the baby boomers who've done incredibly well in their lives. And so that's changing the dynamics of marketing a lot more. And that Gen Y group is a lot more, environmentally focused. They're more looking for honesty, authenticity. They have got sort of high kind of social values. And so, from a marketer's perspective, we're focused on that Gen Y group, and the sort of post-war baby boomers who have all the money are also an important group, and the Gen Xers somewhere in the middle are scrambling a little.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of look at the data. We've watched consumer credit contract for a little over a year with the first expansion in something more than a year, I think just last month. Either an encouraging sign or a sign of perhaps greater desperation. I think we'll know in the next 6 months. We talk a lot about finding the right voice for the environment, right? The way you reach somebody who's, say, in a news talk environment versus in a pop environment, and sort of what that life group, and not sort of in sort of the strict generational sense, but in the mind sense. And, for the communication, getting it into that right voice. And again, that's something that what the digital companies have done is just be able to parse that down and get that right message into the right place. I think as a broadcast company, as partially a broadcast company, we're trying to figure out how do you we're never going to be able to get one-to-one via broadcast, but we certainly could create much closer proxies that we're moving to a persona-based, kind of world. And when we're talking to these kinds of consumers on these types of outlets, there's a way we can get a lot more custom and make that, sort of communication a little more useful and inviting.
Yeah. And, one of the things we found is that we are most successful with advertisers when we actually make the commercials for advertisers. I mean, we happen to have a very active viewer user base, and we basically have a panel of about 1,000 individuals who are true citizen journalists, and they're out there with the most sophisticated equipment imaginable. So we will put out an RFP for Frito-Lay or for Revlon, and within a matter of 30 days, we may have 140 video submissions. You would call them commercials, which we will then turn around, go back to the advertiser with, and create a contest. The winners, are awarded prizes. Their ads are on our air, and their ads are also on any other broadcast outlet out there, as well as online. So, but it speaks to this authenticity and speaking in a different kind of voice, and a sense that this commercial is really made for me, about me, with me, as opposed to made for $750,000 by somebody who is not me.
Happy to report where you've officially become interactive. I have my first Twitter question from Jess Popov, this is a good question actually to ask right now. This could crystallize some of the things we've been talking about. Who do you think is the best advertiser out there today, now, and why? For anyone to take. And you can't say yourself.
Fresh and Easy is a Tesco-owned company that's rolling out in Southern California that's using sort of this consumer-generated spot concept as a way, I think, to super authentically communicate that they're in the business to provide value, this value and values kind of message, and strikes me as on message.
I'm really excited about a company that I don't think advertises in the traditional sense, and that's Recyclebank. And that's a Brooklyn-based company that has a very, very innovative business model. What they do is they tag RFID chips onto your refuse when you go out and recycle. And what they do is they create an incentive for you to do good, as Mark said. So when you go and you put out your recyclables, your plastics, and your glass bottles every week, they weigh it, it goes into your account, and it basically becomes like a frequent flyer model for points for recycling.
Affinity trash.
Totally, affinity trash, exactly, Charlie. But then what's great about that is that then they have tied in with all kinds of companies like Coca-Cola, Burger King, et cetera, so that you're creating incentives. So it's one of those sort of triple win type programs. I think it's a really innovative use of advertising in a non-traditional sense.
I can't pick one for obvious reasons, but I would suggest that companies like the Pepsi and the Pepsi family of companies, Hewlett-Packard, Revlon, interestingly enough, really understand that sort of sweet spot between trying to be as authentic as they can to their brand, to their customers, and being socially conscious at the same time.
Yeah, I like the work that Hyundai did just because they have changed everyone's perception of that brand in a really short space of time, and they really picked the sentiment of the consumer starting back from early last year, and really we're the brand that came into being. And I think long term the implications of what they've done have been really sound for their brand. I also do like the work from Pepsi, and one, because I think that there is trying to change that brand, a major brand, a significant one, with this whole campaign just to be more authentic, to be more relevant to a generation. And that whole campaign started internal, in terms of, it started with the employees about, okay, what kind of company do we want, and recognising that they needed to be as much advocates for the brand as any of the advertising. And they followed through with a combination of traditional new media programs in a very consistent way.
Great. So let's broaden the discussion a little bit. If to all the people in the room in advertising and marketing and media, what would you say, what are the one or two most disruptive or important technologies in technology or media or entertainment that you all are tracking that you're concerned about and that other people might want to be concerned about?
I'll go first. Bakery Fresh Analytics. I'm completely geeking out over them. I got a chance to spend a couple hours recently with John Bothwick from BetaWorks, and he's a VC incubator who's brought out some really great products like Twitter Feed and Bitly. And I think the idea of sort of the now web, where you are looking at the ability to kind of follow links, understand the importance of what people are crushing, right? So if they're crushing a link, they care about that bit of information. They're passing that on to their networks. It's going to create an incredibly real-time dynamic opportunity for marketers and advertisers to really track not only what is trending out there, but what is important and how that's traveling at a much more sort of frequent speed. So I'm really excited about that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, in a word, speed,
Absolutely.
How many people have bought like a Facebook campaign or AdWords? I mean, if everybody's, if you're in the ad business or media business and haven't had that experience, I really, really recommend it. Yeah. As somebody who's in sort of a traditional, media business, having had those experiences, a number of years ago, I was struck that you go on, you build it. I built a Facebook campaign driving in the car on a mobile laptop, and it was posted within 10 minutes, right? And then I could see actually the impressions that were being generated and the click-throughs that were related to it. And I'm thinking, okay, great. That just cost me $123 on my credit card, and we're going to ask people to spend $123,000 a week, and they're going to take a great step backwards in terms of transparency about what that relationship looks like. So I feel the hot breath of speed on our necks as we try to build a like kind of experience where people have this instantaneous dial tone-like information about their advertising.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say singly the most disruptive thing, is generally you would probably consider a good thing, and it's the combination of massive choice and a very fast pipe, so that consumers can have what they want, when they want it, where they want it, at the moment they want it. Which is disruptive to everybody else who's not being wanted at that particular time. We've also trained a generation of consumers that free is good, and that essentially, all content should be unleashed and let loose. And as media owners, we kind of let this happen. And that's a bad thing if you're trying to run a business. And it's a bad thing because you can't really get the genie fully back in the bottle. But nonetheless, that's been, disruptive as well. And it's something we all have to deal with in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I would say that the two media that have completely disrupted the advertising industry has been Google and Facebook. And not because that people are using them and they're significant media companies with large audiences. They have reset the way that we think about advertising and marketing in two levels. One, I think I think Bill Tucker covered this a little earlier on in the previous panel, but the ad model was all about, up till very recently, was about driving awareness and driving through the funnel, down through the funnel. And What Google and search has been able to do is to say, hang on, no, there are different ways to get to consumers more effectively than just ramming it down the top and hoping that you create awareness and then suddenly some of that people pick that up and then eventually buy your product. As well as the level of measurement and analytics that go with that. But most importantly, the accountability of advertising. And that's impacted and repositioned a bit about how we think about TV advertising and magazine advertising. And then social media, and I guess Facebook being one of them, not the only by a long stretch, has made us think as marketers about that whole how people interact with brands, how people pass on information about brands, how word of mouth, which has always been the most kind of important and most influential advertising, but made that much more scalable. So if you can run it, so we ran a TV ad for Denny's in the Super Bowl last year. It was the number one tweeted phrase that next day, and people were finding out about their offer for a free breakfast, not necessarily just because they saw the TV ad, but because that message was being pushed out through lots of different social media channels.
Mark, I just want to pick up on something that you said about one of the disruptive trends being free, that we've trained a whole generation of people that think that information is free. I think that's a really good point. And I'm struck by the fact that with the wireless web taking off, a whole new platform of media, an opportunity to maybe change consumer habits, change consumer behavior. I'm struck by the fact that a lot of media companies are giving away their content for free. And I'm wondering, what are you telling your clients, or what are you doing in your companies, and how do you think about that? And what, do you think it's an opportunity to change consumer behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one way to attack this. On one hand, you want to be everywhere your customers, your viewers, your users are, so you want to be ubiquitous, but you don't always have to be ubiquitous with your best stuff. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So, it's not that you just want to relegate promotional opportunities to the web or to free, but you want to be very careful and parse your content into the most appropriate places so that people really value it at the end of the day. But there's probably like 80,000 different ways to do it, and everybody has to come up with their own.
So like freemium model, you think?
Yeah.
Give away a little bit for free and then...
I think this whole Paywall discussion, or pay window, or pay ceiling, whichever, I think that is going to be the hottest issue for this year for media. And you ask, will consumers be prepared to pay for that content? They're going to need to, I think, because the industry is going to have to find a way through it. And I think it's possible, but not without pain. I think if you think about 2001, 2002, no one paid for music on the internet. And, little company figured out a solution of how to get people to pay 99 cents for a song. And that model's worked. And, it feels very hard to think that people will pay for content, but it is possible. But, yes, you're going to have to lose audience as a result of it. Now, I don't think that necessarily is a problem, because there's probably, at the moment, more supply of commercial audience available to advertisers than the market's prepared to sort of pay for. So there's some room to move. But, I do believe there's it's possible to charge for that content, but it will be painful.
That's really interesting. Rupert Murdoch, who's the head of the largest media company in the world, recently said on an earnings call that content is the emperor of all things electronic.
All those devices are nice, and you need something to put in there.
Right. Interesting, right? Without all these iPads, all these smartphones, they don't mean anything without content, and hopefully like our content. I thought that was very interesting because as the CEO of a very large company, he has a lot of influence and power. I'm just wondering, but at the same time, he seems like he might be kind of out on a ledge by himself, and I'm wondering, are you hearing other companies that are actually moving towards that or getting more serious about that?
I think in our view, it's about relationship first, right? Is there something going on between the user and whatever it is, wherever somebody is experiencing that? Then it's differentiation. What are all the different places that somebody could have that experience? And then it's service level. Is this something that just sort of happens in real time, that sort of streams through my car radio speakers? Really reassuring. Nielsen, through their video consumer mapping study, 77% of all Americans are turning on the radio for about 100 minutes a day. That's pretty good, sort of that about relationship. And then differentiation. What other things, what other sort of useful things and value might we provide to somebody? If somebody wants to hear Ryan Seacrest's AT40 every single day, isn't there a way for us to create a way for them to do that digitally? They can take it in their iPod, stream it on their computer, move it around their life. And then service level. Is this something that you want to be ad supported? You can have it for free, you're just going to have to see ads. Or is it something that we can actually build a subscriber model around? So I think it's a major both and, that the world is just sort of subdividing like crazy. And I think as media owners, that's kind of been our approach, is this relationship, have something that means something to people, differentiate, think of all the different places we can put it, and then figure out a way to provide different service levels for them.
You have, I don't think he is out there alone, so I will take issue with your statement. I think if you look at an initiative like what is commonly called TV Everywhere, which is the cable industry initiative to authenticate their subscribers, and then as long as it's established that you are a monthly fee-paying customer, you ought to be able to watch everything you can watch on your cable provider anywhere you want. And that's not just a show here and there as it's on Hulu, but actual entire networks. And since the fundamental economic balance and equation is my phone, is about the whole being greater than the sum of the individual parts. I mean, the cable networks work because you pay for the entire network, not because you're just cream skimming shows here and show there, which the internet unfortunately did allow some people to do. If you kind of bring it all back in the barn, as it were, this preserves that sort of delicate economic equation. And consumers are willing to pay for this, as long as you make it easy for them, and even beyond easy, somewhat elegant for them. I mean, that's the lesson of Apple and iTunes. So it's just that the industry has to be organized around this and not have people sort of running off the reservation. So
yeah, I think that's where Hulu, as good a medium as it is really starting to get unpicked.
Exactly.
I mean, you saw last week Comedy Central are going to have pulled off their Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert programming off Hulu. I think as Comcast get their arms around NBCU, I think they're going to think, they're going to look at that strategy and decide what content is going to be available free on Hulu. I think that's going to be a real challenge for them. But that's, I would expect that's, as I say, it's kind of a necessary thing that needs to take place. I mean, there's no, I remember when Apple launched the iPad, and people were twittering and complaining that iPad wasn't going to have a flash available on the screen. And that's stupid. The reason they're doing that is they don't want people to watch Hulu on the iPad. They want them to download their TV shows on iTunes, and I think the consumer's going to just have to put up with paying for it, or there are going to be great advertising opportunities which are also going to embellish. They're going to be great opportunities for marketers, and that's the way that people are going to get their premium content.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is I think we increasingly live in a pro-am world. It's like professional, amateur, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. A lot of user-generated content, or all the content that's out there, some of it's less professional than others. And I think that what you're going to start to see is a rise in people really wanting to pay premiums for the things that really matter to them. And there are some media vehicles that are experimenting. I think Hearst is experimenting with new forms for their paid-for content. The Economist has a very robust business, I believe, with iPad, or I think they're coming with iPad, but with iPhone and Kindle and the like. So I think, incredibly, it's going to be more about brands becoming more important and you buying into the content of the brands that you believe in.
A lot of what we're talking about is obviously the internet. The internet is the only major advertising medium that's, experiencing significant growth. Television is expected to grow a little bit, but the internet is expected to grow from 10.1% of total ad spending in 2008 to 16.2% in 2012. So a pretty big jump there. Most of that is being taken out of print media, magazines and newspapers, and a little bit of radio. So what let's talk about the internet for just focusing on it for a second. Obviously the performance metrics, we all know why the internet advertising is growing, because you can prove more than you can in most other mediums what kind of results you're getting. But there's also click fraud and there's other issues with it. I was speaking with an executive from a large internet portal just last week, and one of them told me that despite the obvious benefits of internet advertising, Procter & Gamble, who's one of the largest advertisers in the world, only is devoting 1.6% of its ad budget to the internet. That kind of shocked me. And what I'm curious to hear what you guys think is, if the internet is so great, why are these big companies like P&G spending so little of their advertising budget on the internet, and do you think that the share of that is going to grow significantly soon?
Well, first of all, numbers are tricky, okay? So you really got to unpack them a little bit. Internet advertising around video advertising on the internet, which, other people just call TV, okay, is really where a lot of the growth is coming from at this point in time. Conversely, banner advertising, which we all grew up with, right, is falling through the floor. So it really depends on what you're talking about. So, Procter & Gamble's probably playing it safe. Yes, internet advertising is growing, but it would probably take 10 or 15 years at the constant growth rates that you're seeing now for internet to even get parity with television advertising, as challenging as you think television advertising might be.
Charlie?
I think it's kind of a scale issue for people like P&G too. Obviously P&G has some of the most sophisticated sort of ROI models around their marketing. And obviously there's gazillions of impressions created daily online. But P&G's business model relies on a bunch of people doing things in a relatively short period of time and going in and buying these products on a daily basis. And mass media is still the way to accomplish sort of that simultaneous messaging. And while there's and environment matters too, right? Sort of the mom spots in the Olympics, if you guys paid attention to those. That's one of those. Advertising is a cultural and experiential thing, and I think that with sight, sound, motion, and audio, it just is able to reach out and grab people when they're in a place that isn't necessarily always happening online, and I think that's part of the challenge.
Yeah, I think for Procter & Gamble, they're just really sitting in one category. And when you say that 1.6% of their budget's online, and the average is about 8 or 9%, then someone else is spending significantly more. And we've got clients that are spending 25% of their budget online. I think the other point just about P&G, just to pick up on that, is they are selling laundry detergent and toilet paper, and these aren't things that people are going to Twitter about a lot. They're not things that people are going to put up on their Facebook and say, "Hey, I used Tide last night," and the reality is, and we celebrate, and I know there are a lot of journalists out there like to write a lot of social media campaigns and say, "Oh, that's terrific that they just did this campaign." and they scored a home run. But the truth is that a lot of products are a bit boring, and actually advertising does work, and sometimes you have to remind them when you're going to the supermarket next and you look under your sink and you need some detergent or some soap or some toothpaste, you should go out and buy Crest, or you should go out and buy your brands. And advertising, and we do a lot of there are a lot of very clever social media campaigns, viral campaigns, but our business isn't just about hitting those home runs. It's all about getting those singles and doubles and getting people home, because you need to sell product every day. And so I can understand why the percentages for P&G don't work in that way, but I can tell you if you're selling T-Mobile, which is a client of ours, and you're selling their service and trying to get people to sign up, then online is really important to them.
I mean, one of the big takeaways of 2009, forget the economic crisis for a second, and certainly the first couple of months of 2010, two things I think that are striking people. Number one, if you remember, it wasn't so long ago, it was like 2 years ago, people were going, I don't know when TV's really going to make the leap to, people aren't really going to watch it on their computers, they're not going to watch it on their cell phones.
That's true.
And, it's a lean in, lean out experience or some crap. So guess what? TV is everywhere, and everybody watches it everywhere, and they're just fine with it, okay? Number one. Number two, that happened like in a couple of years. Number two, the death of television that everybody was talking about a lot at conferences like this, like 2 years ago, is surprisingly untrue, and quite the opposite. As a matter of fact, more people watch TV today, even traditional TV on traditional devices today, than they ever have in history. And you look at like the big shows, the Academy Awards, the Super Bowl, are doing ratings like they haven't done in years and years, and sometimes ever, helped and aided and abetted by their new little friend, the internet and social media.
I think that's right. No, that's right. I think the other point on top of that, Mark, is that marketers don't buy mediums by silos. I mean, TV still is a major driver of search activity, right? So you're looking at platforms that Charlie talked about earlier. So you're strategically looking at your role of your TV in the context of everything you're trying to do.
Yeah, in fact, people are consuming just more media generally all the time. If you look at internet usage in the last 10 years ago, in 2000, average amount of time people spent online was under 30 minutes. It's now 4 hours. So, TV in that same time, audience ratings have increased by 20% in the last 10 years. So I think we're all multitasking. People are online while they're watching TV. They are online while they're listening to the radio. And from an advertiser perspective, we're thinking about that. So the media companies are thinking that way. That's why there's so much more content that is being placed in lots of different platforms at the same time as marketers. Now, it's very rare to see a one medium ad campaign. In fact, I think almost it never happens. And it wasn't that long ago that a TV-only campaign was pretty much the sort of a pretty mainstream strategy.
We have a brave man in the audience there.
Sorry, my Twitter's not tweeting right now.
All right, we'll go old school.
We were just talking about TV as a medium. Is it going to die? What about radio? I mean, is radio dead? Or how relevant is radio right now? Because I've been at this conference all day, and I don't think I've heard radio mentioned. It's just a little bit. I mean, this is probably the first time I've heard the word like 3 times. Right. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, certainly the data, in a world that's obsessed by data, arguably for all of us in marketing, the data would prove out definitively not. That after television, radio is reaching almost 80% of the U.S. Adult 18+ population daily, with consumption of around 100 minutes. When you add the condition of employment, it basically brings radio and television exposures to the same level with TV exposure only about 70 minutes more on a daily basis. And that sounds like kind of a bunch of geeked out sort of medium promoter kind of talk. But the reality is, think about the data-obsessed world that we live in and the obviousness of this information. And all of that data comes out of Nielsen's video consumer mapping study that was really done by Nielsen and the Council for Research Excellence in supporting television investments for people, right? So it's completely observational. And if you really look at newspaper, magazine exposures, and even sort of non-email online, there's 20% more daily consumption. So again, this issue of scale and reaching people. Maybe as an industry we haven't necessarily been as present, here. That's certainly why I'm here today. But the underlying fundamentals, and then the ability to create an ecosystem, kind of those examples I shared earlier with Six Flags and McDonald's. I mean, neither one of those guys are slouch kind of marketers, and they really loved those experiences. And to Anthony's point, nothing really exists in sort of a single medium kind of plan today. It's how are you bringing it, and how are we carrying it through for the consumer? Consumers are more skeptical than they've ever been. They're more distracted than they've ever been. We're creating more ad impressions than have existed, almost in terms of our consciousness. How do we get people to sort of self-select and get deeper? The thing about digital, it's the last inch of the last mile, right? And we think about search. It's intentional. It has whole different kinds of impacts on consumers. The idea of us going to people now with plans to sort of move people, here's at the wide end, here's a more narrow place, here's the final place. So that's probably a long answer to it. Hardly dead.
Radio is not dead. You've heard it here first. I just want to drill down on one thing in the internet, which is a thing we're all thinking about and working on, which is this whole social media phenomenon. I remember seeing the rise of Facebook and MySpace, and I was one of the first people to question the business model of social media, mostly because what I saw on MySpace was, people being bombarded by just ads that had no relevance to them, and it just ruined the user experience. But over the last year, I have to say, I've been impressed with the continuing rise of Facebook and its astonishing growth and going from 200 million users to 400 million users. And so, at least in the category leader, there seems to be a sense, from what I see at least, that, we're beginning to crack this business model of social media. And, to your point about paid search, it's proven, it works. There's been a lot of optimism and hope about social media advertising. I don't think it's fulfilled its promise. But do you think, from what you see, that marketers need to be taking it more seriously? And are we going from, the experimental phase, which is what we've been in for the last few years, until this is a real category?
Well, it's definitely a real category. I think, if you Google the words like mommy blogger, there's something like 22 million hits. I mean, they did a study on Facebook recently, and it was one of the first true disruptive technologies to sort of peak outside of that 18 to 24. I think there's something like 45% of their users are now 35 plus. So it's an incredibly inclusive, long adoption curve medium. I think that the interesting part about social media right now is, where does it reside, right? All the debate is there a department inside your company? Is it PR? Is it marketing? Is it search? Who owns it? And just by way of a bit of perspective, I had a really interesting couple of hours with Scott Monty, who runs social media for Ford, up in Dearborn in December. And he's using it in an entirely different way. He's not focusing it just in those areas. He's actually taking it up into social as business strategy for the company. So they're using social not only in a B2B context, but inside the company to connect engineers at Ford to their actual customers and to sort of bypass all the other marketing experts. So one example he shared with me was he started getting some feedback from 20-somethings about a new car design for the Ford Fiesta. And all the tweets came back, and it was like, dude, we're spilling our Red Bulls. And he's like, dude, we're spilling our Red Bulls. I don't know what this means. And it was a Ford Fiesta test launch with a bunch of these kids. And when it came back, it was that the cup holders were like this, like fit for us, right, for our Cokes. And so what they did is they went back and they designed a custom cup holder that would both accept an energy drink like a Red Bull as well as a broader thing. But in the process of that, the engineer was fascinated by the technology. So through Scott sort of acting as a catalyst, he kind of created a greenhouse where the engineers at Ford now are working directly with their customers. So it is definitely here in a big way.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Sort of outside of this, there's an interesting article in the January HBR around sort of customers and marketing. And if you Google it, I think definitely interesting reading on this idea is where does marketing come into play, and should we shift resources into just obsession around customer, and that it's really difficult right up this thing.
Yeah, I think social. We're still discovering this whole social media and different ways of interacting with consumers. The one interesting development is just how technology is starting to play a bigger role, not just in iPhone apps, but also in how those social media. Facebook still really hasn't cracked an advertising model yet. If you think about it, Google and Facebook are the two biggest kind of, I guess, web platforms or websites on the internet. And Facebook's probably valued at about 11 billion, and Google's valued about 15 times more than that. And I think the problem that Facebook has is coming up with some sort of standard advertising vehicle or platform that they can use. And it's sort of kind of counter, because I think a lot of the ad campaigns we're doing is trying to say, oh, we've found a new way of using social media, and that's really clever, and that sort of gets picked up. But I think what the industry actually needs to move that forward is some more standard advertising platforms to work with. So, online video is another interesting area, and one of our holding company, kind of disclosure included, developed some research about finding what should be the online video format that should be a standard amongst the industry, and they did a lot of research, and anyway, they came back with that Hulu model, which is you get a choice of 3 ads, and you want to watch which ad you want, and you decide to push, because consumers love that because they can view an ad that's relevant to them, and it's also more effective. They found that it was 3 times more effective in terms of generating awareness that way. But social media is difficult because it's still very freeform and not very scalable in a lot of ways. And for every Coca-Cola that has a fan page that has 3 million people on that, 3 million fans or friends. I've seen so many campaigns where there's a fan page with 400 fans on it, and it's not working across the board. So
the holy grail really has to be, look, it's not, social media. If I'm in the process of breaking up with a girlfriend, right, I don't want to see some ad for tooth whitener or something like that. It has to be, the holy grail really is something that's entirely relevant to the experience, that is a special app created by an advertiser in the right environment, that is going to cause or be caused by someone who is engaged doing something, playing a game, communicating something in a meaningful way. And if it helps this app helps that process, it will be deeply embedded and will be very successful for the advertiser. And if it doesn't, it's intrusive.
It turns the model around, where marketers have been so interested for so long in attracting consumers to them. This is really about a consumer saying, hey, I'm making this positive election, and I want to take you and put you in me. And to me, that's the big, it's word of mouth. It's, this values, consistency as well.
Twitter's really heating up here. I got 4 more tweets, a bunch of which are about mobile. Paul Helmick says, comment on the impact of mobile devices, smartphones, and how we consume news, media, entertainment, opportunities for brands and advertisers. And DEFCON 5 says, Google said this week they're focused on mobile first, desktop second. So let's talk about mobile for a second. A recent report from Thomas Weisel Partners estimated mobile advertising and marketing revenues on the web will increase 50% a year through 2014, estimated growing to $820 million this year. up from 500 million. So what's your smartest thought on mobile advertising, web front, and what's working there?
Look, I'll just kick it off. I would say huge opportunities, with particularly companies like Foursquare and Yelp, which is all about location-based. So if I, first of all, am on the corner of 49th and 6th, and my phone knows that I'm there, and it also knows where my friends are, and the fact that we can meet up or we can go to a particular place, and that place can talk to all of us simultaneously. And say if we show up at Del Frisco's Steakhouse, we'll be able to get a pitcher of beer or something. That's huge. The fact that my phone will know, the grocery store will know that I'm in Gristedes and I'm in the third aisle, and I will immediately get a coupon for something that they know is highly relevant to me. Huge. But we ain't there yet.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The potential, as Mark is saying, with Foursquare for sort of geo CRM capabilities for marketers is absolutely amazing, and it's just in its infancy. The other one I think kind of interested in is sort of, we talked earlier about sort of shared values and a more discriminating values of the consumer. If you think about like the Good Guide, which is basically tabulating the corporate social responsibility, ethical practices of companies, put that together with a technology like Amazon Remembers that you can take a picture of any product and you'll get back a photo and information on that product in 30 seconds to your mobile phone, you suddenly have this incredible power at the point of purchase to not only look at the price of a product and comparison shop, but really look at the ethics of the company behind it. So it's just another incredible device that's going to provide more control for the consumer.
I think how you model content too, on different devices and particularly in mobile. You think about how people have relied on radio for traffic reports. It always seems to be the freeway you're not on. We've been able to digitize all of this traffic flow data, all incident data, and now it's super, super relevant and useful to somebody, right? So if, I'm leaving the office at 405 and 101 in Los Angeles, and I can tell exactly what's happening on 405 to the airport, that's really useful. For an advertiser to be part of that, I think those are ways that media owners can continue to evolve content to these new devices as well and improve sort of the utility of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the data, the personal data on a phone is, I think, a real powerful application for mobile advertising. And it's not just about iPhone apps. Google have this Goog 411 service. So if you ring up, dial Goog 411, and you want a phone number, normally you'd have to pay for that, right, that service. But your phone, it's got a voice recognition capability, and you say, hey, I want the phone number for American Airlines. Now, I can see that, you can see the advertising potential for that model. Hang on, they know I've asked for American Airlines phone number. Would I listen to a 30-second ad, 20-second ad for for having that service for free? Yes, I would. So there's just so many data opportunities that can create really relevant advertising. That seems to be the name of the game. And where advertising is going, a lot more data, a lot more targetability and relevance, which sort of improves the consumer experience.
I see some hands going up. So in the back, let's go to that gentleman back there.
Thank you. Gordon Brinton, Burning Media Group, with a comment, an observation, and a question. The comment, I really appreciate John's integration of social media to social responsibility and affinity for trash tracking, notwithstanding with RFID chips. Is there another component to this that we're missing? The observation is I couldn't help but notice, as many of you during the break, walking back through Midtown, that the largest outpouring of Tibetans raising consciousness to free Tibet was right in our faces, and it was pretty easy to ignore and just move on because I had something twitting in my face. Having said that, in comment to observation, here's the question. Social media really have a social conscience. I'm on the board of something called Charity Water. We've found that people are, especially Gen Y, who I see is considerably underrepresented here, although that's the key consumer target based on what you're saying. And Anthony, you're right, we're looking for platforms, but Mark is telling the truth. As soon as you standardize an advertising platform, that consumer is going somewhere else. So when it comes to social media and social conscience, I'm just wondering, and this is the big question with Google and China right now. Can governments buy our silence, or will we do something better with social media and figure out why our Red Bulls are tipping over?
Well, I'll start it, but obviously, the couple things I talked about, the Amazon Remembers and the Good Guide on holding companies to account. Obviously, the most famous example was the State Department asking Twitter to not shut down during the Iranian revolution last fall, I believe it was. So, I think all these things are forming. I think the thing that is exciting, and a lot of these are starting through the lens of behavior and marketing, but the potential to use these forums for social responsibility, I think, are enormous. Even other technology like Hunch, which I think is a really interesting new company that basically cross-tabulates 200,000 people thus far, but it's basically finding other people that have the same sort of values and interests that you have that actually help you answer a question. So, those types of intuitive communities are building, whether it's through Ning or through Bebo, and the potential for those, I think are absolutely enormous.
I got another question back there.
What role and how important of a role do you find social CRM tools that are coming out right now? Are you using any social CRM? And if you are, which ones do you recommend or would you be watching?
What would you consider social CRM?
Something like Contagion or Network Hippo that aggregate all your social presence so that you can monitor and track the correlation between all the number of social networks from a numbers statistic.
Yeah, it's a bit about the same point I made about Facebook earlier, which is a lot of these social platforms have great usability, and that's probably where it should start, frankly, because if an application or a tool platform doesn't have a consumer interest or pickup, then there's no future for it.
But my question is more about the analysis of the social network, and have you had, or are you guys working with any tools that help analyze what people are actually doing and correlating them across other social networks? Is this the year where part of that holy grail is social CRM?
One that I think is really interesting is ChartGraph. It's, again, sounds like I'm pimping BetaWorks. I don't mean to. It's in front of mine. But, the ability to sort of look at and track in real time the social conversations around your brand, where those are coming from, and the degree of sort of the amplification in the voices and even the demographics, for me, is really powerful. So it allows you to kind of use that product to sort of converse in real time and understand flash spots, in your brand, and be able to react to people that are either criticizing or complimenting.
I think there was a gentleman back there who had a question. Yep, you go.
I have a question about the influence of advertising on content, because as there becomes more and more real estate for programming that needs revenue to operate, and product placement on broadcast television, for example, seems to be going through the roof. And I'm curious, because we have programmers and advertising people, if it's influencing content at all, or the way content is even created. Is it being driven more and more by influence of advertising than it was before?
Well, I think the answer is it always has, perhaps with the exception of newspapers, and look where they are. I think the reality is that brands are looking for different ways to interact. So just putting an ad that interrupts someone's TV show, or that sort of, that appears in someone's magazine or web page, that is losing kind of favour, mainly because just reaching eyeballs isn't about, isn't where engagement is, and that's where a lot of people want to go. And so, we are exploring more in those areas. There's no way I've worked with any brand that has wanted to do anything that would jar with a consumer or viewer. So, but that's the balance, and because the creative process is a very organic and individual process, it's very hard to make those calls. But I think there certainly is a lot more conversations going with the content providers, the editorial programming people about what brands can do. In reality, a lot of that is coming from the content providers. It's not so much the advertiser with their evil dollars coming in and trying to sort of stick a car in that sort of program or what have you.
By the way, I would build on what you're saying, but I'd also push back a little bit on that. I'm going to say let's really talk about it. Is it really creating a lot of harm that the character in the closer drives a General Motors truck versus a Ford truck? Does it really make a difference? Take it one level beyond that. If Nike wants to totally sponsor a series about urban athletics, and they actually create the program, they actually pay for the program, they help get the program placed, and yeah, a lot of the kids in the program are wearing Nike shoes, but it's not really the sole purpose of it. Is that a misrepresentation, or does it create a series that otherwise might not have gotten created and do some interesting things? So I would ask of yourself, on one level, with all the proper documentation and representation, where is the harm?
And actually, now in the last couple of years, because of Twitter, because of Facebook, there's real and immediate real-time feedback. So I know that there's, I think that's the programmers and a brand's nightmare, is they do something on a show and then within 6 seconds someone's tweeting saying, that was a real dumb thing that they just did. So I think there's almost enough check and balance that's taking place to manage that. And I mean, I think all media companies are looking for better ways to monetize their content, and I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah,
and when it crosses the line, I think you know it when you see it. It's like pornography, right? When people are doing something pretty inappropriate on a newspaper page, and it really blurs the line between editorial and advertisement. I think you know it.
Just get into 2 more questions. This is a really deep topic. We can come back to it later, but the gentleman right there, and then one more back there.
I had a question about privacy that was sparked by Mark's comment about what advertisement I want to see on Facebook when I break up with my girlfriend. Do you think the privacy advocates are just never satisfied socialists, or are there going to be new restrictions and permanent restrictions that limit the trackability of the data you're talking about?
Well, one thing I've learned in this country is that you can't please everyone. I also think people's views change. I remember the CEO was at a conference, and the CEO of Vodafone said that when they Verizon first made available caller ID, it came up on people's phones, they had thousands of people writing angry phone calls saying, how dare my phone number come up on someone else's phone when I call them. And then, now people wouldn't think twice about it. So I don't think there's an exact answer on it. I think it's a moving target. Yeah. You can stop it. You can stop a lot of the things. You can stop people calling you. You can stop receiving junk.
But you can opt out, and you can opt out, and lose the cookies, and lose the convenience. I think that's kind of the issue. But in our data with BAV, we looked at it. It's not an issue at all with millennials. I mean, they're the ones that are driving some of these technologies, like Tumblr, or not Tumblr, but Foursquare. So I just think in the future, your IP address is going to become as important as your social security number. There is going to be questions about privacy, but there are going to become questions about how much you want to participate and what sort of convenience you want to get in content in return.
One more question.
My question goes back to when you were commenting on these paid models for newspapers and such online, and I think that model is going to fail either on the part of the Post or on the part of the New York Times, because instead of looking forward and seeing that whatever people select to read might be a vehicle by which to market them, they're shutting down. Certainly, I think the younger community, the millennials, are not going to buy into that. What do you guys? I would like you to elaborate further on this issue, because I think that trying to go back a little backwards is not going to work. I think that, like you said, Pandora's box has been opened free, and we need to figure out how to
Yeah, I'll repeat what I was saying earlier. I mean, from our approach as content producers, build a great relationship. Make sure what somebody's getting is, makes them want to maintain that relationship with you. Differentiate it across a lot of different products, and then provide a variety of service levels, none that are forced, and allow the consumers to self-select through that. And really, as a media owner, I think a content producer, you're trying to optimize in that, right? And if you sort of believe that consumers will sort of give most value where they perceive to be getting the most value, that in our view, allows for that optimization.
Well, I'm sure some of you want to get to the cocktail party, so that's a wrap. Thank you for coming.